Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the next update to the French presidential election series. So there's been a lot of polls. It looks like two of the main, or at least two pollsters, Opinionway and IFOP Fudical, not sure exactly how to pronounce that company's name, have switched to daily running polls, or sorry, rolling daily polls, and a bunch of other companies like Ipsos and Harris Interactive have also published polls recently. So I figured it was worth doing another update for this because the map has been changed a little bit, so it is interesting. And some trends are that I speculated on last video are coming through into this one. So to go for the get-go, so if we look at this map, this is the first round result map. So I'll get into percentages in a moment, but needless to say, Mélenchon, Zemmour are down. Pécresse, Le Pen, and Macron have all gained points. Where this is most noticeable, and I did this again, I switched Basrin and Hoterin. I keep doing that. Just mentally flip these two colors. I had to fix that. Say Livy. So the main things we can see here is Northern Corsica, Alps Maritimes, and Sarthe here no longer have Les Republicans in second place because both Le Pen and Macron have gained ground relative to Pécresse since the last update. She has done better in those departments, but not enough to keep pace with the other two parties who have done better in those departments. The big story here, though, isn't small, little department changes. It's really the solidification of, it looks like, two areas. So Macron is doing a lot better in the west, particularly along the coast, and into the central plateau here. I believe this is a plateau. And along the Pyrenees. And Le Pen is doing a lot better along the north. The intensity of a lot of these colors has greatly increased, much more than an increase of vote share by 0.4% would make you believe, especially considering Macron in the same time had about a 0.5% increase in vote share. The intensity of vote intention up here in Grand Est and Nord is a lot higher than you would expect as a result, and a little bit to the less to this region. I can't think of the name of it. But on the flip side, along the south, along the Mediterranean coast, Le Pen really hasn't gained much new ground. Hasn't lost ground, but hasn't gained ground, which is interesting. It seems like most of Le Pen's gains are really in Nord and Grand Est, and holding the fort in Corsica, these overseas departments here, and southern France, and losing a little bit of ground in Normandy relative to Macron. So that's really our story here for the first round. It's the big thing that seems to be happening is Le Pen seems to be regaining her footing. It seems to be mostly at the expense of Zemmour, who is fading a little bit. I would hazard to guess Zemmour fading might be a corollary with people being uncertain that he will even make it to ballot, because in the French election system, each candidate has to get 500 elected representatives, and to my understanding, it can be any elected representative. So it could be from someone as small as a town council to someone as large as as the president. Though why Macron would endorse a rival to himself, I do not know, but in theory he could. I suppose if he was not running. And since Zemmour is an outsider and does not have any party infrastructure and has no as a result, has no members of any level of governance aligned or explicitly a part of his party, it's questionable that he might not be able to make it to the ballot. He might not be able to get enough endorsements. Le Pen, Pécresse, Macron are all shoo-ins. Mélenchon's a bit less of a known, but it's very likely. He's managed to get enough signatures in 2 previous presidential elections. If he doesn't get it in a third, I would be very shocked. Some of the other candidates that I do have tracked, like Hidalgo, she's a shoo-in. Dupont-Onel, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is not. He's done it before, so it's likely he'll be able to get enough endorsements, but it's not. It's not guaranteed. Though I would assume he will. And Yado will probably get enough. Oh, and Christina Tabira, who have added to the polling, to the model, because she is polling decently, not amazingly, but decently. She'll also probably get enough support, but again, it's not certain. Now, there's also a question of some of the left-wing candidates like Hidalgo and Tapira, and I can't think of his name, but another one have been speculated they might do a unite the left candidacy where 2 of them drop out in favor of the third after a primary. I believe they're calling it a citizens primary. I don't know the details on this, but if that happens, you might see another name pop up down here. My rough threshold is 8-ish% of the vote reliably to be listed here. Even though I'm tracking about 9 candidates, I just don't want, like, the bar would be like this big. It'd be like this big. Or I could overflow and put it over here, but it would look messy. And frankly, Zamor and Mélenchon have not even come second place in a single department. So if you're adding somebody who has, in the case of Tabira, I believe, we can check this for certain because I have a spreadsheet here. Tabira has 2.28% of vote intention. Jadot is the strongest at 6%. Like, they won't even come close to second place in a department. And since this is a pictorial map, that the main essence of this video is a pictorial map, or the main thing you're looking at, and my mouse moving around frantically, and then occasionally a spreadsheet. There's just nothing to see. There's no point in putting them here. Though I am now putting a spreadsheet with polling numbers, and I'm going to eventually have a graph once I have enough weeks of this in it. I will note that these stars here indicate that I forgot to write down these candidates last week before I destroyed the results and got new ones. Oops. And I just noticed that this date is cut off, but whatever. You don't really need to know the date. So this one won't obviously be used in graphing, but it's just useful to know. So you can see here, again, Le Pen's about up 0.4, Zamora is down about 0.5, Pécresse is up about 0.2 if we want to round a bit, Macron's up about 0.5, and Mélenchon's down by about 0.4. A good portion of Mélenchon's support has went to Tabira. It's not captured here. And some probably went to Macron. Same with, I believe, Hidalgo and Jadot are also down. Again, some going to Tabira, some going to Macron, because barring the French left deciding to do this citizens primary and doing a single candidacy, and with the other ones bowing out, having ever more candidates doesn't make any sense. It completely counterproductive to the electoral system, makes no electoral sense, and it really is frankly just a waste of money because all these candidates are going to be asking their supporters to donate the money, and they're going to spend this money, and they have no hope in winning for the presidential race. Like Hidalgo sitting here with 3% of the vote, she is 7th place in a system where only the top 2 matter, and there's not been a single poll where she's outpolled Jadot or Melancon that I can think of off the top of my head. Looked at about 50 right now, so there might be the odd one, but she basically never outpulls Jadot and Melancon. So frankly, other than pride, I don't know why she's running still. Same thing with Dupont. I know he's never pulled, or he has not pulled meaningfully high above double digits since I believe March of last year. And he keeps going down in polling numbers. So if he actually goes to stay on the ballot, that's really more pride than anything practical. But yeah, if he wants to waste people's money and his time, go be it. Same thing with Hidalgo. Same thing with probably Tabira. And same thing probably Jadot. Though there is the possibility that Jadot could outscore Melancon. But again, Melancon right now is 5th place in a system where only the top 2 matter. Maybe he'll rally support. Maybe Jadot will rally support. It's really not hard to say right now, but it seems a lot of these candidates in this French election are running more for pride. Because the other thing too is you have to keep in mind there's I think officially like 20 or 40. I think it's like 40 candidates officially. Not all of them even get their names mentioned in polling. There's so many of them. So a lot of it is people just running for the sake of pride. Some of them you could argue, like Zamor, he probably doesn't really have a chance of winning. He's pulled second place a couple of times since his name's been mentioned, so it's not impossible, but it's unlikely given he's consistently polling 4th place right now. But he has enough clout and enough media attention that you could argue he's running to get his message across and maybe come in second place if he's managed to convince the right that he's correct. But someone like Dupont, like polling, what is this, 7th place, 8th place maybe? I don't want to do the math, I think it's 8th place. Maybe he's getting some media time that I'm not aware of, not being able to speak French particularly well, enough to read polls and stuff like that, but not enough to watch like French television. Maybe he's getting airtime and he's getting message across, but I'm doubtful. Happens a lot here in Canada too, where you'll have candidates run and you can even be getting quite a large polling support in our election system. You don't need, like, you can win seats and have influence in government. I guess you can also in the French system, the French parliament, but the parliamentary elections happen separately from the presidential ones. So I'm doubtful in place for people like Dupont and Agnon and Hidalgo, or even Tabira, that their running is going to mean anything at all. Jadot, you could argue, might be running for notoriety for his party, like get the name out of the French Greens. That's what I'm going to call them because I can't think of the name what their acronym stands for. It's EELV. I'm not sure what that stands for off the top of my head. So there's these considerations, but let's go back to the more interesting part of the video, which is maps. Maps. So let's go to second round data. So we'll start off with Pécresse versus Macron. So the big thing here from last week, so Pécresse has lost support relative to Macron. The main notice of this is she's lost it's mostly this region, I can't think of the name of it, Normandy and this Auvergne. I believe this is Auvergne and the Alps. French regions, I'm not 100% certain. But this region here, Normandy, and this region here is where you mostly see the support loss. Macron has gained ground in roughly the south and the center plateau here. Hold Brittany lost a bit of ground in Paris. Pécresse, in the occasional polls that do Paris versus regions or etc., Pécresse is actually polling relatively well in Paris, but there's really not enough polls with that data, so it's kind of hard to say if those were just flukes or if that's actually quite true. So it could very well be possible that if it is Pécresse versus Macron in the second round, that these Paris departments might be wrong in my model, because there is the odd polls, like Elab has had some polls where they poll the voting intention of Paris area, Paris region, separately from the rest of the country. And Pécresse does quite well in them, especially even in a second round consideration versus Macron. But I don't get a lot of those polls, so it's kind of hard to see how much that weight is going to take into effect, but we'll see. The main thing here is, yes, it does look like Pécresse has slipped a bit, but in practice, like you look to the round 2 here, she's basically just where she started off with. It obviously this is 3 data points, so this is irrelevant. Like this is not what's the word for it? It's not enough to really create a meaningful trend, but this is a flat trend right here. I can just tell you. Yes, there might be a minor negative slope, but even then I'm not 100% certain, not having graphed it, but this is essentially flat. Also the same thing with Le Pen versus Macron. That is a flat trend. These are both flat. So what we can say regarding that is, while Le Pen and Pécresse seem to be gaining still ground in the first round, as is Macron, second round, the criteria hasn't changed, which is interesting. So with Pécresse, she's been doing quite well recently, rallying the support of Le Pen and Zemmour voters for second round voting intention, but she's not doing great with left-wing candidates, which is not that surprising. And she doesn't seem to be doing great with quote-unquote other, which is mostly other left-wing candidates, so again, not that surprising. So, yes, she does have a chance of winning, because if we go back to here, and you look at these, this is about 50% of the vote. I can tell you right now what it exactly is. Live. Look at this. Live Excel. Isn't this so cool? 49.14. So if she gets any vote share from the left-wing parties, or left-wing candidates, or other, which is also including other pretty much, that means they have about 50% of the vote and she wins. Same thing with Le Pen, if she can rally everybody on the right. Though the thing with Le Pen, which I will go over to her map while I talk about this, just as an aside, you can see from last week she gained more ground in the north, which is sorry for this, carries forward from the first round. She's doing very well in the north. The intensity of these colors is a lot more than the small gain in vote share would suggest. Holding her own in the south, and is making some inroads in Centre Valley de Loire and Franche-Comté, Burgundy, and a little bit in Normandy. But where Le Pen is doing quite interesting is, I'll go back to here. She doesn't do great with Taubira, Hidalgo, or Jadot supporters, but she does quite well with Mélenchon supporters, which shouldn't be that surprising if you think about it, because Mélenchon is like the populist left, and Le Pen is like populist right. And at the end of the day, yes, they might disagree on exact policy things, but they all agree on the populism part, that there's something wrong with the current establishment and they need to reform it and change it. So, in that regard, she actually has more room to gain, because yes, she is scoring lower than Pécresse. Pécresse is about 48.77 in a head-to-head, and Le Pen is 47. But the main thing is, she's only rallying about 50% of Pécresse voters. She's pretty close to getting all of Zemmour and all of her own voters in the second round. and she does okay with some of the other left-wing candidates, but particularly she does quite well with Melancon, considering he's a socialist, a populist socialist, but a socialist, and she's obviously not. She's very not socialist. Though, what catapults her into losing this matchup is about 50% of Pécresse voters are voting for Macron in a hypothetical head-to-head. Or, I'm going to rephrase this, about 50% of the Pécresse voters who vote in this round are voting for Macron in hypothetical, which shouldn't be that surprising and is actually a major improvement from 2017, where I believe it was 80% of Les Républicains voted, first-round voters voted for Macron. Now, that said, this is not too dissimilar from the polling leading up to the second round of the 2017 election, so I would put a big caution here, because Le Pen's biggest supporters are blue-collar workers and young people, which is strange coming from not the blue-collar workers, but the young people coming from a North American perspective, where young voters are typically siding left-wing, but they're distinctly not in France right now. Young voters and blue-collar workers are two of the most depressed voter turnout groups traditionally in elections. Blue-collar workers typically thinking that their vote is meaningless, and young people because they don't understand the importance of their vote. Whereas, to put the distinction there, the blue-collar workers don't think their vote will change anything, whereas young people don't understand voting, typically. Like, they know how it works, but they don't really understand the pros and cons of voting, like what the voting means. This is not a clear description, and I would have to actually sit down and think about this in a more cognizant detail to make that point clear. But she has the two groups that typically vote the least, and Macron carries really well with the elderly and the retirees, who vote a lot, who are the most reliable voters. So this could easily, even though right now it's looking at 53 to 47, in this hypothetical head-to-head on actual election day, this could easily be 60-40 because of voting turnout differences. My model, I've been trying to look at modeling voter turnout, but it's not that it's difficult, it's just that it's a lot more time, and I don't really have the time to right now in my life to add an entire hypothetical voter turnout projection. Though I will note, France does actually provide enough data that I could probably do this. Some countries like Canada, our polling data and our election data is pretty bad, so it would be very difficult to do that for Canada just because the data is just not available. US is another country where this is an easily doable thing to try to project voter turnout based on historical trends. The data is readily available, free online, and often in good format, so it's quite easy to actually forecast that. But this is not that. So what we are right now here regarding the French election is stagnation. We go back to this one. So the relative gains, the second round is stagnating, and the first round we are getting the top three are distancing themselves from everybody else. Early December, it was a lot closer across the top five, but as time goes on, it looks like that's separating, and it looks like Le Pen is starting to regain her support. I would not be surprised if current trends of polling continue that Le Pen might breach 20% before the end of February. Or, obviously, as politics and campaigning goes, she could not. There is still the odd polls that come out where Pécresse is outperforming Le Pen. I believe Opinionway has had quite a few of those. Either they're head-to-head or tied, or Pécresse is slightly leading. So it's still perfectly plausible that Pécresse will outperform Le Pen, but it's looking more and more like Le Pen has gotten her act together, or the people who deserted her voting intention around last September, to people like Zemmour and in December to like Pécresse, are coming back to her. It strongly looks like that for Zemmour. Zemmour's polling numbers are going down slowly, but they are going down. His height was, I think, 17-18% in November of last year, 2021, and now he's polling around 12%, with the odd poll being 13-14, but the average seems to be about 12 in recent polls. So he's going to keep going down, and I think a lot of these voters are going back to Le Pen. And I think there's kind of a self-fulfilling cycle there. I did mention earlier how I think there's probably some of this is driven by a lot of news stories that I got recently about speculating that he might not get onto the ballot because he might not get the endorsements, which is probably starting to fuel it. And there's also probably a lot of people looking at it be like, oh, well, Zemmour doesn't look like he's going to overtake Le Pen, but I don't want Pécresse to be the right-wing candidate. I'd rather Le Pen be the right-wing candidate, so people are probably moving to strategically vote there. We'll see how that continues, but I expect that will continue. And in the event Zemmour does not make it to ballot, I would not be surprised if this 13% he has right now, if 80% of that moves to Le Pen. And I don't want to do the math, but that would put Le Pen solidly in first place in round one. Though I will note here, we go back to this won't affect second round meaningfully, because about 80 to 90% of Zemmour supporters are already voting Le Pen in second round, of those who vote in the second round. So I don't think this will affect the second round, but first round it could catapult Le Pen into first place. But this is a two-round election, and the real question always been for Le Pen in the two previous elections he's run, can she get either enough people to not vote in the second round that she wins, or can she convince the people to vote for her in the second round? Compared to 2017 and all the shit that has happened in the world since then, I'm extremely doubtful that you will see the kind of visceral negative campaigning against her in the second round that she experienced in the first round, where people were voting against her just because they were voting against her because of the history of the National Front and her father. Whether that's good or bad, I will not judge. That is not my place making these videos. I'm not trying to say what is a good or bad party. I'm just presenting the model and the data and the campaign news. But it's very likely that there won't be that visceral reaction if she gets the second round. Will she lose? Will she win? It's hard to say. Pécresse is still, I don't want to count her out. She's still leading in some polls, and I will note Pécresse here and Le Pen here are getting these second round projections because they were within a span of a week. They do lead some polls in second place, either tied second place or by themselves exclusively in second place. If Zemmour or Mélenchon were getting reliable polls where they were second place, and the data for second round vote intentions was around, I would also include them. For example, Zemmour, though, he doesn't really get a lot of voting intention polls questioning a head-to-head between him and Macron anymore. He used to, and not really anymore. So you also have data problems there, which is also why I wouldn't. I mean, it's a lot. It's not a lot of work, but it's enough more work that if we go here, doing it for someone like Dupont is just like absurd. Like he's not even close to second place, let alone first place. So doing a hypothetical second round with him is just nonsense. He's almost certainly not going to get there. And there's just not the data for it, so just whatever, doesn't mean anything. These are always supposed to be a very concrete, very fact-based videos, and try to cut down my interpretation as much as I can. Try to reduce editorialization in these, but it always happens. You can't make a video about politics and not have some editorialization slip in. But that's where I am. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you liked it, please like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel quite a bit. I don't want to be too beating the head out of this, which I always stuck this at the end of the videos instead of front loading them like some YouTubers. But it does help the channel, and well, I don't make money out of this, and I don't really care if I do. It would be nice, and it would just be nice to get the content, get the information out there, because I think there's a lot of really bad pollsters and polling aggregators out there who, by virtue of being loud and well known, like to throw shade at the US, 538 is pretty bad. They were really off in the 2020 election. They don't get shade for it very much because they predicted Biden was going to win the election, but their state-based results, because in the US it's essentially 50 state elections and you aggregate the results to get the presidential one. Their state election projections were really bad. They really overestimated Biden across the board in almost every single state, which is embarrassing. And apparently they're super credible pollster that people, or polling aggregator that people consider, and it's silly. There's a lot of these bad polling aggregators, and I'd like to get actually good stuff out there. And yes, I do consider myself good, relatively good. I have the last couple elections I've covered, the 3 that I covered with this channel are what's the word for it? The best on the market for any comparable ones, like the closest to the money on my criteria, which is the unit that I'm coloring in this case departments. I am the closest on, I have the least average error per department, or in Canada, least average error per province. In the US, least average error per state. The headline top results might be a bit wonky, but people don't really, like, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter who has the political power in this particular instance because of quirkiness of how seats are drawn up and stuff like that. What matters is when you're looking at a map like this, when you're looking at a polling aggregation like this, is where politicians' support is coming from and where their trajectory is going and how they're doing politically. It doesn't really matter if Le Pen or Macron wins. What matters is, do I have the support correct for them? But that's enough me waxing on the point of this channel and what I'm trying to do here. So if you do like the video and you do like the channel, please like, share, and subscribe. Extremely helpful and greatly appreciate it. Oh, and don't forget, comment below. I do love the comments. I do like reading them. There's often quite informative and useful things in them, and some of them are just funny. So I welcome them. With that said, though, I hope you all have a good day, and I will see you next time.